In the parable of the lost son, the father is generally understood to be God. This parable falls within a set of parables where Jesus responds to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law as they complain about Jesus eating with sinners. The two parables before this one are the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. In those two parables, the main character is actively searching for what is lost. Jesus wants the Pharisees and the teachers of the law to know that God actively wants the return of those who are lost. But in the parable of the lost son, there is a switch. As far as we are told, the father is not searching for his youngest son. In fact, Jesus does not even portray the father as trying to stop the youngest son from going. The youngest son asks for his share, and the father divides the property and gives his son his share. In this parable, Jesus is portraying the realities of our choices and God's responses to them. In the beginning of the parable, the father does not force the youngest son to stay. Humanity has free will. God does not force us to remain in the righteous ways of God. God wants to take care of us. God wants to have a relationship with us, but God allows us to make our own decisions, even if that means we might choose to squander what God gives us, even if that means the consequences of our actions end up hurting us. What happened to the youngest son did not happen because of a lack of love from the father. What happened to the youngest son was because the youngest son chose not to stay with the father. When we sin, we choose to live apart from God. When we choose to follow our own misguided directions, we bring about the consequences of our own actions. But the son chose to return to the father, and we get to see the response that Jesus wanted to describe. The story should have ended differently. The youngest son all but spat in his father's face, deciding to act as if the father was already dead. The father should be angry or resentful. The father should discipline his son. The father should make the son work to pay back his share. These are the just things to do. God is just, but God is also full of grace and love. While the son was still a long ways off, the father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And the son tries to apologize, declaring that he is no longer worthy to be called his father's son. But the father pays no mind. He ignores that and instead turns to his servant and says, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." This is the center of the story, couched between the responses of the two sons is the actions of the father, actions of love and compassion and forgiveness, a feast and a celebration for a lost son. So while the Pharisees and teachers were complaining among themselves that Jesus welcomes sinners and eats with them, Jesus is saying, "Of course I do. This is what my Father desires." Like the father in the parable, when God sees us turn back towards the righteous ways of God, when we start moving towards a relationship with God, God does not sit idly by and wait. God sees us and rushes to us. God is not waiting on our return to punish and scold us. The picture we see from this parable is a parent who earnestly desires to have his children return home. God earnestly desires you to return from any unrighteousness in your life. We were not created by a God who loves to punish us. We were created by a God who loves to love us, a God who desires our healing and restoration from the brokenness that we find ourselves in. God is waiting for us to turn from our brokenness back to the Creator, who is waiting to celebrate our return.